The Revelations Easter egg in Black Ops 3 leaves a lot to be desired. For a final battle to close off the loops of the main Aether storyline, it's boiled down to shooting rocks and throwing the summoning key around like a baseball. The recent leaks from Treyarch revealed the intended version of this Easter egg if the developers had enough time and resources. In this video, I'm going to delve deep into the leaked Treyarch documents and try and piece together the Revelations Easter egg that could have been. Now, this is all just my interpretation of the documents. There's a lot of ideas thrown around in there, and it's hard to tell which ones were one-off suggestions or which ones actually had development time put in. If you read these documents and have a different interpretation, I would love to hear about it in the comments. The visuals on screen here won't be super relevant, so feel free to have this video on in the background and treat it like a podcast or something while you're camel grinding. Alright, let's get into it. The map flow starts out the same, with the Apothicon God sucking up the Pack-a-Punch machine, and you need to override the corruption generators in order to capture it. Very early on, the devs floated around an idea that the player needed to, and I quote, allow themselves to be ingested by the female Apothicon God and extract their glands, which contain mating pheromones that will attract the male with the Pack-a-Punch machine. I'd rather not go any further on that. Anyway, the wonder weapons for this map would have been the 4 elemental bows, presumably the ones from DE, along with a couple other ones like a flamethrower, Skull of Non-Stopway, Ragnaroks, a couple random ones just thrown in. But the bows were the main focus. To get each bow, the player would have to summon and accompany a unique guide throughout the map, while overcoming certain puzzles and combat challenges. In order to summon said guide, the gateworms and eggs from the current Revelations Easter egg will come into play. They function similarly to how they do during the current Easter egg, but they are available as soon as you enter the Apothicon for Pack-a-Punch. Once you found an egg around the map and hatch it in the Apothicon, you would have to take it to a certain spot in the map to summon your rune quest guide. At the end of each guide sequence, the player would receive a unique rune that they could take to a so-called Dark Arena. I'll get into what the Dark Arena is in a moment, but after completing the challenges in the Dark Arena, the bow would be available for pickup in Kino. Now this Dark Arena thing is somewhat like a Dark Ether-esque version of Kino der Toten. To enter this arena, a rift will appear which will become a portal if activated. When a player enters with a rune, they can place it and summon various mini-bosses and fight them with different gameplay modifications or environmental hazards. A really unique feature is that when in the Dark Arena, both players and enemies project an image of themselves into the normal version of Kino and vice versa, which allows for players outside to help with the challenge. If the player does not start a challenge, after a certain amount of time, the area will begin to fill with a dark smoke that will gradually do damage and force the player to leave. Certain items in the normal version of Kino will reflect traps and their status in the Dark Arena. Here are a few examples. Candles will be lit if the flame hazard is running, and if someone knifes the candles to put them out, the hazard will stop. Spotlights will correspond to columns of light that damage the player. Control switches on the stage can turn them off. Counterweight pulleys can be interacted with to turn on and off electric traps. Seats in the audience will be either up or down if pits are open or closed in the Dark Arena. They can be shot or interacted with to put them back up. Players can also purchase power-up drops to reserve for use in the Dark Arena from an altar somewhere in Kino. The whole point of this Dark Arena is to give players an area to do challenges to get the elemental bows. The flow of these challenges would go as follows. A player with a rune approaches a summoning circle in the middle. The summoning key will be locked inside of some sort of dark energy sphere with different runes floating around it. When the player interacts, the specific rune you have will light up and they will all drop into the ground. The summoning key would then become agitated and start frantically bouncing around inside the sphere, and mini bosses would begin to spawn and the challenge would begin. There are 6 total rune challenges listed in the files: Blood, Electricity, Fire, Light, Shadow, and Weapon. I'll go into what each one entails. Starting with Blood. The aforementioned guide for this one is a blood crystal. Completing the blood ritual unlocks the Keeper Protector for the map. The player must enter the Dark Arena with their gateworm and open up a crack in the wall. There's a keeper trapped inside the blood crystal. The Shadow Man also has quotes that taunt the player during this time. Once the challenge is activated, zombies will spawn around the crystal to defend it, and the player must do enough damage to the crystal. It will teleport around the arena once a certain threshold has met, and this will repeat a few times, while it rises higher into the sky each time. After enough times, it will slam down into the ground, freeing the Keeper, and thus unlocking the Keeper Protector for use around the map. The Electricity ritual starts at the Verrucht Power Room, where players would take their gateworm and release a ball of energy. This ball of energy would respond to zombie kills by floating towards their corpses. You would have to guide this ball all the way back to the Kino teleporter. Once at the teleporter, it would split into 3, and the player would have to run around and collect them by running over them with their shield out. They could then be deposited in a jar in Drak's Undercroft, possibly the one that makes the weird noises when you interact with it in current Revelations. Once all are deposited in a timely manner, they form back into the big ball of electricity and then float over somewhere to reveal the electricity rune for the player. Once the player has the rune, they may take it to the Dark Arena for the challenge. The special challenge for this one is killing mini-bosses while pillars of electricity are arcing between each other, blocking off paths. The fire ritual starts by bringing your Gateworm near Quick Revive and summoning the floating ball of lava from the Drak Fireball questline. It will begin to float around, following a certain path around the map, and at 4 locations it will stop, cool down, and form a crust, and then will shoot fireballs out. You are tasked with luring zombies through these fireballs, then killing them to charge up the big lava ball. This challenge gets more difficult at each location, introducing moving fireballs and fireballs with a short lifespan to the equation. After completing this, the fire rune will be available, and you will have to take it back to the Dark Arena. The challenge for this includes killing mini-bosses while fire sets the arena ablaze. This fire will both do damage to players and will create explosive fire zombies similar to the ones seen in Transit or Gorod Krovi. The light ritual begins with you bringing your Gateworm to the cell block and Mob of the Dead. The Knight from Drak will be your guide for this one. He will be in a suit of armor with a skeleton inside. He will speak to the crew, saying something along the lines of, "Primus, you have returned to battle the ancient evil once more. I will find my companions, and together we will break the seal." You must defend in 2 separate places around the map while he resurrects his wolf ghosts. Once both wolves are up, they and the knight travel to some sort of obelisk where the light rune is, and dissolve into energy, breaking it open, allowing the player to pick up the rune. The Dark Arena challenge for this one is killing mini-bosses while a large ball of 115 moves around the arena. The 115 periodically flares up and damages players who aren't hiding behind some sort of barrier. The Shadow Ritual begins with a Gateworm at the Shangri-La Temple Courtyard. You place it down, and the Void Bow entity from Drak appears and says, "Why have you returned? I will not be imprisoned again." The player is then locked inside of the courtyard, and 4 waves of lockdown begins, with black smoke closing in from different corners, tightening the play space as the waves grow. Each wave consists of Furies and zombies. The players must kill them inside of the middle area where those Eclipse buttons from Shangri-La are. After all of the waves, the demon will die and get sucked up into an urn, and then the rune will appear. The Dark Arena challenge for this one is an interesting one. The arena will be pitch black, and the only light source will be from the mini-bosses that you have to kill. The last ritual on the list is the Weapon Ritual. The rune for this one is a simple pickup in Noct. Bring the rune to the Dark Arena and the challenge will begin. Players will be stripped of their weapons, and the Shadow Man will appear along with random weapon power-up drops. The goal is to use these random weapons to damage the Shadow Man. There are 3 phases to this fight. Phase 1 is normal zombies and low-tier weapon drops, along with some walls in the player's face. I presume these walls will drop on players like the ones in the Origins Crazy Place to cut off paths and cause chaos. Phase 2 is napalm and electric zombies and parasites, along with more walls and mid-tier weapon drops. Phase 3 is all types of special zombies and even more walls, with high-tier weapon drops. The Shadow Man also has special abilities during this fight. A bullet-blocking force field that grows in size each phase, probably like Valentina's from Mauer Toten, if I could guess. Also a fireball attack, that's probably like Mephistopheles. And lastly, an electric shock attack, which I presume is like the Keeper from Drak. Completing this weapon ritual unlocks the Skull of Non-Stoplight or the Ragnaroks for the player to choose from as a reward. Now that we've gone through all the Wonder Weapon challenges, we can take a more high-level look at some of the next steps in the Easter egg. The first main step of the Easter egg would be some sort of puzzle sequence. Now, the documents list quite a few, so I'm not going to go into much detail on them because we'll be here for the next 2 hours. Some of these ideas kind of seem like they were just shouted out at meetings, so they really don't have any weight to them. But if you guys are interested, I'll make a separate video going through all those challenges. Some of these puzzles ranged from collecting Rubik's Cube pieces in order and then placing them in the right order in a certain spot. Another one is going on a timed hunt using audio clues to get to certain locations. And there's another one where you have to use the Beast Mode from Shadows of Evil to rotate statues. Speaking of Beast Mode, it seems like Beast Mode was going to play some sort of part in this map. I don't know exactly how it would have gone, but Beast Mode is mentioned quite a bit. Anyway, there's a lot of ideas that were thrown out, but obviously none of them came to fruition. After the puzzle sequence, a combat sequence would begin. Somewhere along the way, the summoning key would have to get picked up. Some ideas thrown around were grabbing it midair using the jump pads, or through a secret area only accessible with beast mode. In this version of the Easter egg, Dr. Monty would be locked inside of the summoning key. Some materials would need to be gathered in order to free him. Some of the materials are souls of mini-bosses, flesh from the inside of the Apothicon, and a ritual stone from Mob of the Dead that is only visible in beast mode. Player would then venture into the dark arena with the summoning key in hand and begin the process of freeing Dr. Monty by placing all of the materials on an altar. This process would consist of 4 phases. Phase 1 is parasites, Phase 2 is meatballs, Phase 3 is margwas, and Phase 4 is a combination of them all. The player with the summoning key in hand would have to move to different locations and protect it from zombies. After enough protecting sequences, a giant keeper boss similar to the one on Horizon Drive would appear. After the boss is defeated, the whole map would get darker and Monty would float in the air above the altar. Players would then have to go to each island and flip power switches near generators to increase their power and form a beam of energy to shoot Dr. Monty. After all of the beams hit him, Dr. Monty is finally freed. A quick side note here, now this whole section is a little confusing in the documents, so I tried to piece it together the best I could. The document goes back and forth between Monty and Maxis being trapped in the summoning key. It also contradicts itself, saying Monty and Maxis fight, but in another place Maxis and the Shadowman fight, and yet another place it says a Shadowman and Monty fight. I feel like Monty being trapped and then released to go fight is the one that makes the most sense. Also, one more thing, one version of this whole sequence is just the 4 waves, while the other version is the ritual item collection with the Horizon Drive mini-boss. I prefer a combined version, so that's what I'm going with. At this point, Dr. Monty's Super Pack-a-Punch would be available if you did all of the other maps' Easter eggs. You can check out the video I made about that to hear more about this reward in detail. The link is in the description. The final sequence in this Easter egg is a fight between a giant version of the Shadowman and Dr. Monty. They would both fly around the map, and players would have to help Monty win the battle. Getting kills near the two fighting would have special effects. The Shadowman could become staggered, and Monty would take the souls of the zombies you killed to become more powerful. Shooting corruption beam lasers into the Shadowman's eyes would also have a special interaction, probably staggering him or something. The main way to defeat the Shadowman would be through the use of the rockets from Horizon Drive and Moon. They would have to be defended while they charged up, and then after launching at them, the player would somehow have to manipulate portals to send them through to hit the Shadowman. After enough hits, the Shadowman would be defeated and a cutscene would play. I have a link in the description of a video by SkyInit, I think I said his name right. He goes into detail about what the changes in the cutscene would have been. Alrighty, that was an interesting ride. This was a little difficult to make, as there are many contradictions and things that didn't go into too much detail, but I hope everyone could understand my interpretation. I'm new to making long-form content like this, so if you have any feedback or critiques, then feel free to leave them in the comments. I hope you all enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.